Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of AVA, the Album versus Album podcast, where I sit down either by myself or with a guest and talk about which album falls under a niche umbrella best. And this week, I think we got a really special one for you guys. Not only is it the first in a line of collaborative episodes, it is one that I am very excited to bring you because it is a special guest that it's a first-time collaborator, and it's one that we've run in similar circles. He's a huge, he's a really prominent voice in the scene of music criticism, and he's a very well-articulated one at that, and he's one who has been one that I'm a pretty big fan of over the last couple of years that I've really started to dive into his content more. I'm talking about the one and only Mark from Spectrum Pulse.
Hi guys, how's it all going?
Thanks for coming on the show, man. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I've seen some of your stuff on in passing. I saw some of the stuff you did with Crash back in, I want to say, the Pitchfork review, and it was kind of funny because you, John, and Crash had that meetup in I think it was like North Carolina. It looked like a ton of fun.
Oh, yeah, and I had seen the stuff that you had done with John and Hannah, and I had seen some of the Billboard Breakdown stuff, and I think I've told you this before, but I think it's really cool that you run a show like that acts as a really good slice of history, and really good at documenting the evolution of music throughout the popular eye.
Well, I appreciate that. I will say that it's a little bit excruciating these days because 2020 has been a reoccurring element of 2018 in that we have album bombs seemingly every other week, but...
Oh, and I can imagine with the charts being as insane as they have been, it's been almost a roulette of sorts. I can imagine that it's been a lot of work, but I think that it's really amazing that you're keeping up with it.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that.
Hey, not a problem. And now for those who either are new or aren't familiar with what this show is, what we do is, like I said, we sit down and talk about we each have an album in mind that we're going to discuss and give our defense of, and sort of if it falls under, why we think it falls under its respective part of the umbrella, the best. And the theme this week is actually a little, it's as niche as they have been, but the subjects up for discussion are on two polar opposite sides of the spectrum, even if their respective releases do hit in that similar way. But before we get into that, as you guys may know, what we do is we wrap up the last thoughts that we may have had on the last cast, which, if you tuned into that, it was which infamous record will leave the longer-lasting stain on its respective artist's career. Talking about Speed and Bullet to Heaven and Jesus is King. And before we turn the question over to the guest, I'm going to go ahead and, while we're recording this in advance, I will give a cut right here to any comments that may have been made between its posting and when I'm editing this. So the only comment as of editing this that I got isn't necessarily one to do with the topic at hand of last week, but it's all right. Mark and I actually get into a really good conversation about it. It has to do with the podcast itself, and actually comes from an announcement. That's why I'm addressing it here, and not just, I addressed it in the comments, but I'm addressing it here as well for those listening to the episode. It's from longtime viewer, KLM Stars, long-time subscriber to the channel. Much love to you, Matt. He said, love this cast. Thank you. And said, and need for it to make an appearance in the podcast section for iOS so I can throw it on during work. Well, Matt, KLM Stars, you are in luck because as of editing this and recording this here dialogue, I'm working on getting it on the Shoutengine platform, which I think puts it on iTunes or on the Apple iOS podcasting section, which is great. Shout out to Mark, fully involved, for throwing that my way after we had recorded our episode, and I'm finally getting together the wherewithal to sign up for it and are converting the old episodes to MP3 because they don't take WAV for some reason, even though that's the format that I save all these podcasts in, which I'll still be doing for the video version just because WAV is the superior audio format, like full stop. But they need MP3, so tonight I've been going through and putting all of the old episodes into MP3, so I can put them on Shoutengine and have them published wherever they distribute it to. So if you're familiar with Shoutengine, I know we're at least going to be on iTunes, which is what you're wanting. KLM Stars. So if you use the podcasting app, at least, you should be able to find us. And if you are finding us, or if you do want to listen to us in further episodes and would like to contribute but don't necessarily want to go to the comment section on a YouTube video, feel free to hit me up anywhere else. If you're listening to the episode and something comes to mind, shoot me a DM, either on Twitter or on Instagram, or at me on either of those platforms. Either way, if you got a jumping on point that you want to, or we don't present a talking point that you come up with for the argument, feel free to do so. I'll be addressing them at this point in the podcast before I pass it on to the guest, and or just go into the subject at hand for this particular week. But that was the only comment we got on the YouTube version of the podcast. Again, hopefully you guys who do listen to podcasts throw this on wherever your heart's content, wherever it's available to you, and that you enjoy it. But I'm going to go ahead and cut back to me and Mark. And with that out of the way, I am going to turn the question on to you, Mark. Are there any points you would like to make as to which artist or which record would leave the bigger stain on its respective artist's career, Speeding Bullet to Heaven or Jesus is King?
The sad thing is that I think that on some level, I think both of them will wind up getting forgotten, but for different reasons. I already think Speeding Bullet to Heaven is kind of on its way out anyway, with Kid Cudi making a dramatic recovery. It was clear that it was a moment in a niche for him at a specific time. And hell, in 2020, he's got a #1 song with Travis Scott, which is something he'd never had before.
That's also very true.
You could make that argument where he has made a recovery. He has gotten back to a peak in which, even going back to 2018, where he had Kids See Ghost, I was lukewarm on the project, but it showed Kanye on a path to recovery, and that's been showed Kid Cudi on a path to recovery, and that's been a recurring theme for a lot of his work. Kanye, on the other hand, seems to think he is on a path to recovery, and somehow it's only making it all seem so much worse. Like, at this point, it's not even dread, it's not even anger, it's just sadness. It's looking at the people around him and like, what are you doing? Kim, you have to realize how this is impacting your brand.
For real. And like, it's insane how he continues, and I address this in the cast, that it's almost stylistically, with every Kanye release, he sort of disregards the past and just keeps pillaging forward with wanton regard for what the previous record may have done impacting in the scene. But because he's, at least image-wise, continuing to pillage forth what Jesus is King did, it doesn't seemingly sound like he's letting up on this side. But outside of that, he is continuing to surround himself in his own I don't want to say he's delusional, but I mean, it's very insane how far off he's gone, and
well, he's having a manic episode. That's what I'm seeing from here. And I listen to it and I'm like, I can't be angry at this. I can be angry at everyone around him who are trying to profit from this and who are trying to nakedly exploit this. But I look at Kanye right now and I'm sitting there and I'm like, dude, this is not, like, somehow your poll numbers are dramatically worse. Like, I don't know what sort of constituency you're trying to build here, but assuming you're acting rationally in any way, and assuming this isn't an album rollout, which I think the majority of hip-hop thinks it is, but what album are you rolling towards with this?
Honestly, I don't know anymore, and I don't even think Kanye is fully I mean, obviously he's not pulled together, but he doesn't have the same scope or plan that he may have had even 10 years ago. His if you look at the build up to, say, Dark Fantasy or even, Yeezus, it feels a lot more calculated than anything post Life of Pablo has been. Yeah, like the Wyoming sessions all just kind of fell out into the world. And while he was building up Jesus as king a lot, he wasn't doing it in the same way. And I agree. I just feel like he doesn't have the right people around him to rein him in or to steer him. He's like a rabid dog off a leash, and it's upsetting, because the guy does have when he pulls it together, he can have a good vision. But I feel like because he's continuing to fall in the lane that he's in, it's Jesus is King won't be a record that people will forget anytime soon.
Well, the thing that I'm noticing is that even with I've always, like, the one thing he said, like, going in Jesus King, is that he will only make music focusing on God. Now, how much of that is true, given a lot of the subtext of Jesus is King, is up to interpretation. But the one thing that I've noticed is that a lot of his struggles and pieces coming out of that, I don't believe that'll last. And I think for as long as this manic episode continues, I'm not sure what's going to happen alongside the creative process. Because the one thing that's happened outside of... We are recording this currently on... Do you mind if I mention the date?
No, that's fine. Yeah, go for it.
July 19th, 2020. This is coming after he had a rally in South Carolina where it doesn't look like anybody was wearing masks.
Yeah.
Which...
That's something else for itself. Yeah, that's...
Yeah. And he made some statements about Harriet Tubman, which he should not have made.
Nope.
And I'm now seeing this, and again, he doesn't seem stable. He doesn't seem put together. But again, I'm asking the question: how much of this is gonna stick? Like, there's a part of me that even looks at the Jesus is King Sunday service plan and sees some level of calculation, because of all the lines that draw from the prosperity gospel.
Yeah.
This doesn't feel like that. This reminds me of Yay, and not in a good way.
Well, and I would absolutely agree with that. And what I think is interesting is that it's not the first time he's made comments like this in an interview setting, but because it's in a completely different environment, one that seemingly is tied to his album cycle much more directly than like a TMZ interview. This is gonna be even more of a divisive point, I feel like, because of that, because it's not within the confines of a professional setting. It's in a public area. It's in a fan like arrangement, and it's, I don't know. It's, yeah, Kanye's...
You hit the point on the head by saying it's a fan-like setup, because he's not going to get pushback.
Yeah, exactly.
He's not going to get the person at TMZ who will stand up and say, "Kanye, you have morphed into something that is beyond the pale here." And without that person to pull him back from the brink, like, I'm sitting back here and I'm looking at his label mates, and if there is one point where I wish that someone like Push would step in.
Yes.
And say, "Kanye, like, you are putting the money in jeopardy here."
Yeah. Especially when he's... And I mentioned this in the thing. He helped, in just a year earlier, he helped make arguably Pusha T's best record. He pulled together a lot of things for his label and for those in his circle that was some of the best, like, production work he's pulled together in a long time. And like you said, I feel like, yeah, someone should step in from his label, Push, somebody, just to get him away from whatever is keeping him in this terrible headspace.
What scares me is the come down. Because, again, if he's in a manic state right now and he's not on medication, as he says he's not, it's not going to be a fun situation. And the thing that I noticed, and I think even Kanye would admit this, that there's a lot of deep underlying trauma in a lot of what he's gone through, and just in terms of parental figures. I saw a comment on Twitter, is basically like, maybe Jay-Z should give Kanye a call just to say, hey dude, you know what, we can be friends. You can just stop this, please.
Which is a good
segue to where we're going.
I was gonna say, speaking of Jay, thank you for that extended thoughts, by the way. I really appreciate that. The subject of today's episode is one dealing with both two huge pieces of the music world, Jay-Z and Radiohead, and the context of both of their most recent releases, Radiohead's A Moon-Shaped Pool and Jay-Z's 444. The question I'm wondering is, which of these late career bounce backs does a better job at both extending the artist's sound and cohesively, creatively comes together in a more complete package? Now, what's going to happen is I'm going to give Mark the floor first. He's going to speak in defense of 444, right?
Yes.
He's going to speak in defense of 444, and I'm going to speak in defense of A Moon-Shaped Pool. We're going to have our talking points sort of address each other's talking points and put our defense out there. And so with that, Mark, why do you think 444 falls under that umbrella better?
Okay, first off, a few stipulations here. Number one, I'm not a Jay-Z fan. I don't think I've ever really been a Jay-Z fan. I didn't grow up on East Coast hip-hop in the same way as many did. I came to Jay-Z fairly late in going through a lot of his back catalog, but that also means I've kind of avoided the Jay-Z bias that tends to taint large subsections of certain types of rap listenership.
Yeah.
I say this because while Jay-Z does have classics with Reasonable Doubt, you can make a credible argument for either the Blueprint or the Black Album. What Jay-Z was going through at the latter half of the 2000s, and I'd argue the beginning of the 2010s, was a slump.
Yeah.
And a pretty active one, because I'd argue the Blueprint 3 is trash.
Okay.
What the hell is
Magna Carta Holy Grail? Yeah,
was bad too.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like Watch the Throne because, and I'll say this, because I think a lot of people are now in the situation of defending Watch the Throne because the production is insanely good. But I look at the content and I'm like, if there was a point where Kanye's lyricism is matching with Jay-Z's, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Because Kanye's not a lyricist.
No.
So the one thing that I greatly respected going into 444 was a change in scope and a level of introspection and reflection that Jay-Z rarely brought to the table and in the same degree. And it felt like such a dramatic shift coming off of the super polished opulence that was so endemic in his projects ahead of time. You're not getting songs that are all about celebrating some puffed up legacy. It's now forcing to bring Jay-Z back to the man, forcing him to confront his sins, what he has done, and take a more granular look at his legacy. Of course, you're going to have braggadocious moments. Of course, you're going to have pieces where he's going to talk about property and black excellence and black capitalism, the last of which I think is probably the most contentious part of that album. But it's also territory that, while Jay-Z has touched on it, it's aspirational with a little bit more depth and detail. It's not just him owning the art, it's him explaining how to own the art. And when pairing it with the redemptive narrative that came out of having him confront his sins with regards to Beyonce, and the fact his marriage nearly blew apart because he cheated, and a lot of those pieces, which shows a level of vulnerability you didn't get from Jay at that time. And sure. I also want to highlight No ID as the producer, because a lot of this sound you would not expect for Jay-Z. Again, it's much more stripped back. It's lean. The mastering is not altogether polished. It's got the edge of something you would find off of, to quote Mike Seatown, you'd find it off like a mellow music group production. It's something that you wouldn't expect Jay-Z to rap over, but he does so well, and it fits together as a cohesive product. What I loved about 444 is that I was sitting there like, oh, it opens this lane for Jay-Z. Like, there's opportunities here. Now, granted, I bring this up because I think his next two projects kind of stifled that, which was Everything Is Love with Beyonce and that written testimony thing he did with Jay Electronica earlier this year.
Oh, yeah.
but at the same time, in terms of a late career reinvention, Jay-Z kind of knocked it out of the park here.
Honestly, I had a discussion with somebody about these projects who was on my side of the argument that I'm portraying this week, but I felt very similarly to a lot of the points you brought up, and I'm really glad you brought up not only No ID's production and how different it feels for a Jay-Z project, but how Jay uses that to enhance the messages he's trying to bring, like on the story of OJ, or on parts like with the pain within the title track's instrumental. I definitely agree that this presents Jay in a lane that, one, we've never seen him before, but also justifies some of the follies within those last couple of projects, like on the story of OJ, where he talks about his investments and he talks about his wealth that he's accumulated and why he made a record like Magna Carta. I definitely agree with a lot of those points, and I think that alone was why I wanted to present that. However, what I would say, why a moon-shaped pool is the bigger bounce back, or at least the more, why it falls under the umbrella better, is one, because throughout the pantheon of their career, whether you like their more odd offshoots like Amnesiac, or their more back to basics expansion records like in Rainbows or Hail to the Thief, the King of Limbs is across the board by many viewed as the first real misstep in a career that has spanned nothing but forward-thinking, alternative, experimental rock in so many different facets. And while I don't think anybody ever counted them out post King of Limbs, because of the time between records, because the maybe lingering doubt and the underwhelming solo output from Tom post King of Limbs, a Moon-Shaped Pool was in a weird place for people. And what's interesting about this record is that not only does it expand their sound into a more reverb-soaked, string-heavy atmosphere, it does so through the guise of interpreting a lot of old ideas and letting them sit in this realm cohesively. Like, a lot of the tracks on here, Burn the Witch, Full Stop, the closing track even, True Love Waits, has been floating in rotation since 1995, and yet everything here, while still playing in the same lyrical threads that Radiohead almost seemingly does to a joke at this point, of the sorrow, the sadness, and everything, because of things that happened in Tom's personal life, his separation from his longtime partner, it gives a lot of those moments a real sense of sincerity that I feel like Radiohead, while seemingly emotionally tapping into a lot of their audience's own sadness, felt in a realm of reality because of that. And not only that, they still continued to branch out into the same other broader lyrical realms that they've done while enhancing the sort of sonic palette of the record, like on Dex Dark, or how the numbers and present tense seemingly tie into less emotional realms of lyricism, and still continuing to explore different classic sonic ideals as well, like on Full Stop's more krautrock inspired instrumentals. A Moon-Shaped Pool may on the surface seem like just another Radiohead project but with strings, but because they did such a masterful job at letting all of these old ideas pulled together with the same sort of band of brothers that they've always had, Nigel Godrich is still producing this one, it acts as a real tour de force in showcasing why Radiohead still remains one of the most discussed and celebrated bands within their genre.
See, okay, this is the funny thing here is where I don't know if you saw my original Moon-Shaped Pool review back in 2016.
I don't know if I have, honestly.
Okay. here's where I kind of, because I've said this before that I'm not the biggest Radiohead fan.
Yeah.
And I was like, my favorite Radiohead album is The Bends.
It's a great one. I think it's really underrated as years have gone on. I think it's an incredible record.
I would agree with that. And like, but as such, a lot of my favorite Radiohead records tend to be from a certain palette when it comes to when there's a little bit more of an edge that creeps through a lot of their points. So while a lot of people view The King of Limbs as a massive misstep in Radiohead's discography, I don't to the same degree. I've got the odd opinion of thinking The King of Limbs is not that bad.
I don't think so. I mean, that's why I've made other videos about the record specifically, because I don't think it's that bad at all.
Like, I think it's different. I think the focus that they did on percussion was actually kind of forward-thinking, and I think that there's elements of that I think have translated okay into some of Tom's work. But the one thing I drew upon your question here is that help expand upon the sound of the artist.
Yeah.
I look at A Moon-Shaped Pool and I don't hear an expansion of sound.
Okay.
Not at all. Because to me, this feels like very much Radiohead going into, if anything, a more accessible comfort zone. It's softer. You have a lot more of the string sections. It feels more accessible in the return of the familiar. You brought up a bunch of the songs that have been in their set list for years. It almost feels like Radiohead is reinviting people back to a comfort zone. And to me, that doesn't... To me, the one thing... I draw a comparison with the Jay-Z project. You can... Regardless of what you say with 444, that is not Jay's comfort zone, nor that of much of his audience.
That's true. That is definitely true. I feel like the biggest reason why I may have put this up against Jay, because I honestly, part of me kind of agrees with you in that 444 does feel like the bigger broadening of sounds, but I feel like the addition of that warmth, the addition of that sonic accompaniment that they teased with on elements of King of Limbs, like the strings that were on the end of Bloom or their Spectre theme, and incorporating that more arrangements and a production style that doesn't feel as in line with... I mean, some of it feels similar to stuff that they produced on Kid A, like the soft acoustic moments definitely feel more in line with like the soft moments of Kid A for sure. But I think the doubling down on twinkly atmospheres, and not just in an intimate way, I feel like that is what would justify... That is what I feel like sets it apart and makes it a sort of expansion on their palette. Do I think they're expanding their wings as far as Jay? Probably not. But I think because they were able to creatively... Again, like I said, creatively bring all of those songs and let them fit. Because True Love Waits isn't about his separation, but how they sell it in tandem with how they sell some of the other moments on there, like the end of Daydreaming, help propel that sense of sincerity that I alluded to before. You know, and I feel like their ability to do that with songs that may not have necessarily thematically fit and making it work is what I think, again, not necessarily expansive, but helped bring those elements that are new for them into their discography much more easily.
See, and this is where I'll actually disagree with you. Because the one thing I'm looking back at my old reviews of A Moon-Shaped Pool, and I stand with the fact that I find that album very clumsily sequenced. I find that it doesn't flow particularly well.
Interesting.
And when you have a lot of those disparate ideas, if they don't have that interconnected flow or cadence to them, I often find that it can lead to a project where the impact feels a little bit diminished. And here's where I think comes to my second point, and I think this is one that I brought up in my review and is contentious. If you go back to, I want to say, the mid to late 90s, when not just Radiohead was making their full stride into mainstream popularity, but also the fact that they had achieved some level of cultural influence, especially in the UK, that there was a sound that they were pushing forward within rock, specifically subsets of progressive rock. So you had bands like Elbow and Travis and, yeah, to some extent even Coldplay, who were drawing upon a similar palette. And the artist I haven't mentioned is Steven Wilson. Because I bring that up because the more I've listened to Moonshaped Pool, I listen back to this, I'm like, wow, there's a lot of chord progressions and a softness of tone and melodic development. This sounds a lot like Steven Wilson, which I found incredibly ironic.
Yeah.
Because if you go back to when Porcupine Tree first started becoming a thing in the late 90s, the big shining indictment against them is that they were a Radiohead ripoff.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking, okay, if they're now circling back, and they're now emulating the softer focused sounds that was emblematic of prog rock at the end of the 90s, especially in the UK. And now that those are tones where a lot of those specific groups have now evolved into different territory, it felt like it reinforces that idea that Radiohead is going back to a comfort zone for me. Except now this time it's one of a larger genre.
That's actually a really good point, and it's one that I usually make when discussing Hail to the Thief, but I've never really considered a Moonshaped Pool in that regard, because whenever I talk to anybody about Hail to the Thief, I like that record, but to me, it's Radiohead's attempt at a Muse record. I think that a lot of the ideas sonically very much in line with Muse in their construction. Again, it has its Radiohead touch, but down to a lot of the writing, and while again it has its own Radioheadisms, the leaning more on political tendencies more so than what came on the last couple of records, the bigger focus on grandiosity and explosions feels very Muse-esque. So I could, and coming after those two records, I can see why they would make a record that's a little more in their comfort zone with a Hail to the Thief. And honestly, I would not disagree with that with a Moonshaped Pool, because you're right. I mean, you are. That kind of blows my mind a little bit. I mean, I'm serious. Like, I'm kind of left a little gobsmacked. But again, this is kind of why I'm glad you wanted to do this, because I feel like we would both have a lot to say about both of these topics. And I feel like while you may not have necessarily make me appreciate a Moonshaped Pool less, I definitely look at it through different eyes. But I would agree to an extent that feels a little less in line with the initial subject at hand.
Well, the thing that I've noticed is that I brought up all these points in my review, and Radiohead fans hated it. And this is something that drives me a little bit off the wall within that specific fandom. Oh, yeah. And I'll say, and this is a parallel that I think is valid between Radiohead and Jay-Z. The fans are so insular to what they see as the influence of their act.
Yeah.
In that they've cottoned on to the belief that this act has been so influential, so dynamic in defining a scene, that they almost struggle in a sense of denial when it comes to the fact of, no, they're emulating certain sounds. Like, this is where I break away from a lot of people, specifically surrounding Kid A and some of their more electronic experiments around the turn of the millennium. I listen to those albums and I'm like, I know what electronic music Tom York was listening to.
Yeah.
Like, I know where he was pulling from. That's not to disparage the quality of the album, but no. It's also implying that there is a certain path there. And this was a big thing when it came with Jay-Z as well. When it comes to projects after the Black Album, hell, I'd actually say parts of the Black Album, that were pulling from very specific, that were not just coming from a singular creative force that was just all him all the time. And it became endemic when he started actively ripping off trap flows and pieces like that came off of on Magna Carta Holy Grail. He started doing the Rick Ross thing, and I'm like, this is not you, and we know it's not you. And that's what, I'll be honest, this is what kind of bugs me about what going after Moonshaped Pool and after 444. Because Jay-Z went back to doing the trap shit, and clearly trying to land in a lane that is not his, and you can kind of tell. And I'd say, whereas Radiohead has just burrowed down so deeply into their lane, with Tom York going off to do his solo stuff with Anima last year, and with Ed O'Brien putting out his album this year, that again might as well be Radiohead B-sides.
Oh yeah, no, I enjoyed, and I saw your part of On the Pulse with the Ed O'Brien record, and we have differing opinions about that, but I do have a follow-up question then. Do you think Radiohead embracing those sonic ideas in that facet do expand their sound in a way that they may not have explored before, similarly to how Hail to the Thief sort of integrated their electronic musings with a little more of a back-to-basics sound that they had done pre-Kid A?
Yes and no. I feel like the one thing that I think going into a Moonshaped Pool, you have the elements that are going back to the comfort zone. I wish I felt like the strings embellishments, I wish I felt that some of those other touches that showed an expansion of their sound came with something that felt a little bit more compositionally interesting. That's where I'll look to the King of Limbs. Like, as much as I don't think it worked, it was compositionally interesting. And this is where I kind of fall a little bit out of step when it comes to Radiohead, because I don't think they've been on the cutting edge of the sound they're looking to push for some time now.
I'd agree with that, for sure.
Because, I don't think... again, I'm looking at a Moonshaped Pool with as much of it being kept in-house, with as much of it being, self-contained, and going back to a comfort zone. I don't see... Unless you have found a greater emotional resonance in the crystallization of that material, which I think is subjective. I think if you found that, good for you. I couldn't. I wish I could. But at the same time, to me, it is not an expansion in the same way. That's burrowing down to an emotionality that's already had its roots.
Okay.
With Jay-Z on 444, I think that was... You're in different territory for him, and it's pulling upon something that feels different when it comes from Jay-Z. I like Jay-Z when he's out of his comfort zone, because more often than not, he tries a little harder, and you can tell when Jay-Z's not trying.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, I would argue Magna Carta Holy Grail is him, like, his own version of... Sorry, what?
I think Blueprint 3 is way worse than
really?
That in terms of him not trying, because it feels so lazy. It feels so badly produced too, and the production's aged terribly. Songs like Young Forever, for instance, are just so friggin' lazy.
I think that in the case of the Blueprint 3, and this is a completely different conversation altogether, he did... Because I was re-listening to that recently. I've been in a little bit of a J kick recently. And while he did not necessarily make another blueprint of Jay-Z, he did his best to incorporate a lot of what... I felt like he was trying to play Nostradamus on the Blueprint 3. He was trying to... Because he had Drake before Drake was huge. He had Cole before Cole was really huge. He had ideas that he thought were going to be the future, because he was trying to make another Blueprint with, like, Death of Autotune. I feel like he thought maybe Death of Autotune was on its way out, but
I disagree with that completely. To me, it felt like a man who was kind of losing touch, trying to maintain control. he had Cole on, but Cole's his artist.
Oh yeah.
He had Drake, but if you were in touch with Drake at this point, this So Far Gone had already dropped. Drake's debut had already been out. Like, Drake was out the door and moving at that point. Jay wants to associate himself with that, and when he sees a tone that he doesn't like on Death of Autotune, he tries to kill it.
Fair
and
enough.
Fails.
That's also true. That's fair. That's fair. But yeah, I would say that while I may have tried, I also do agree that 444 puts Jay in a place he's never been before. It also acts as sort of the second act to a 3-act album cycle with Lemonade, This, and The Carters, but it does a good job at telling Jay's side of things while also being a sort of experiment with his own sound in a very successful way. And while
the one thing I think actually is it actually ties back to something you mentioned about A Moon-Shaped Pool, sincerity. Because if that's a big point to the emotional resonance that comes out of that album. The one thing I'll say about 444 is that it's the most sincere and human Jay has sounded in, I'd say, since American Gangster, but you can go back further.
Oh,
And it shows a level of vulnerability and an ability to touch upon things that go to a deeper element of his psyche that was not otherwise exposed.
I would definitely agree with that. I mean, I think that it is the most in line with any sort of human resonance Jay, I would argue, honestly, since pre-Black Album, because even American Gangster was written in a sort of style that I feel like was more indebted to an aesthetic, whereas 444 definitely just feels like Jay really writing Jay. I mean, even from the opening track, Kill Jay-Z, he's trying to put any preconceived notions about himself down and make something much more raw.
Well, it's ego death. Yes,
exactly.
You have to kill your ego to be able to build something more out of it at the end. That's why I think it's a really terrific, well-structured project. I think the sequencing of that project is excellent, and that's one reason I think the emotional resonance comes through in a way that A Moon-Shaped Pool never did for me.
That's fair. No, and while I don't necessarily agree with the sequencing on A Moon-Shaped Pool, I can see why it would deter people, or in the case of if you don't like this sound within
so
Radiohead.
Well.
Yeah, it does. Oh yeah, Burn the Witch is incredible, and Daydreaming. I don't know how you feel about that song, but Daydreaming is still one of my favorite Radiohead cuts. It is haunting.
I think Daydreaming is decent. I think it's terribly placed.
Yeah. Where would you put Daydreaming on the album personally?
Midway through.
Okay.
To me that's a 5 or 6 tracks in song.
Okay. Fair enough. But yeah, I mean, I think we've both definitely, I think you've made an excellent case. Hello everyone, Post Johnny here once again. How's it going? Before we dive further into the podcast, because Mark is about to ask a follow-up question that puts the conversation into a completely different lane that I'm so happy happened. It again brought forth an incredible conversation between the two of us that also had its own rabbit hole between the worlds of Jay-Z and Radiohead. But before I do that, I wanted to address the Instagram poll, because I always try to make that an integral part of the show. And what better point to bring that in than before we move on to another subject involving these artists. I put this poll up on the Instagram, and a lot of my viewers agreed with me. It won in a 13-5 vote, so 72% of the people voted for A Moon-Shaped Pool. And if I were to deduce why, it would be partially a springboard off of something Mark actually brought up. He brought up that while in this comfort zone that Radiohead was lying in, it created this sense of accessibility within this project that wasn't seen within King of Limbs that may have been present on records like In Rainbows or Hail to the Thief. And I could see why, following in this lane of this question, a Moonshaped Pool would have won the poll. Also, while I do talk about hip-hop a lot, I don't know quite the breakdown of the viewers or Instagram followers who prefer hip-hop to indie or alternative music like Radiohead, and so that could also be a part of just a demographic divide. But if I'm looking over who voted for what just by the people that I know, I could see, or it could be in the sense of something that I brought up, that King of Limbs was such a colossal failure by and large across the Radiohead fandom that a Moonshaped Pool just felt like a breath of fresh air, and that could also be a factor into why. Yeah, that's all I wanted to bring up. There were no comments on the poll. Nobody made a comment saying they meant to vote for something else or anything like that. But nobody had any breaking off points from their voting point. I'm just looking into who voted for what and why that might have been, looking at the discussion points that Mark and I both brought up. Now let's get to that tasty fucking question that Mark threw my way while I was stuck, still mind blown by what we had just talked about.
Well, let's go for a follow-up question. I think that both artists still have the potential to expand where they want to go.
Okay.
As both groups are older, they've been in the game for a long time. Where would you like to see Radiohead's sound go?
Honestly, I would almost like to see them do an expansion on one particular track, not even from a Moonshaped Pool. I want a record that sounds entirely like Life in a Glass House. I want that raw type of production from that song with that sort of brass accompaniment to give their, almost tie back to their being titled Radiohead days. I would like something that drastic of a sonic shift, because while I love Nigel Godrich, I don't want him doing the next Radiohead record. I want them to bring somebody in who can give a sense of... I want them to keep it emotionally raw, but I want the production to suit that.
So in other words, you want them to make their Grinderman album.
Yes.
Actually, I just saying that out loud, that sounds amazing. I want to see Tom York do a Nick Cave.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love for them to really tap into a different lane emotionally while not necessarily distancing themselves from what made them so resonant to begin with.
But do you think that at this point Tom York's writing is capable of it? Because that's the thing that's frustrated me with Radiohead. I can predict the subject matter and tone of their material almost down to a T at this point. They've drilled into that lane for 20-odd years.
I think if they got a new producer in to really rein them in a little bit, and if they stop recycling old songs like they did on a Moonshaped Pool, absolutely. Because, I mean, I think that even some of the writing that isn't old, like if you look at some of the metaphors and stuff on Daydreaming and Dex Dark, or even the Burn the Witch has been going around since 2003, even some of the stuff on that, they could do it in a way that's more poetic in delivery with that level, with that type of production that I'd like to see.
See, the funny thing is, I'm as much as I think a super raw Radiohead would be incredibly cool, and like I don't think you would get a producer like the producer that immediately came to mind when you described that, Steve Albini.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes.
But the thing is that Albini is not the guy who would force them to go in a specific direction. He would just give them the palette and they would work within it. And I'm not sure that would spark the dramatic change.
Yeah.
For me, with a lot of the strings integration specifically, I got to thinking about a lot of stuff that Arca and Bjork are doing.
Okay. Yeah.
Like a lot of something a little bit more effervescent and more expansive, a little bit more fluttery in that sort of tone. Like, did you ever hear the Julia Holter album, Avery?
I have not, no.
Aviary? Beautiful project. It didn't really work for me. Anthony Fantano loves it. I wish I loved it because I loved her album, Have You in My Wilderness. The one thing, if you can tap into that fluttery, kind of fractured atmospherics where maybe a little bit more flutes in order to back up the strings, I think that could be really, really cool.
So you'd rather them write Utopia or like a
I think
what's her album before
them making their Utopia would be really cool.
I would agree with that. I mean, if it would be a good way to expand upon what they were trying on a moon-shaped pool for sure. And I feel like
I think it would give it a little bit more distinct identity.
I feel like logistically, or honestly, that would probably be, especially following Anima, which had more of that EDM, IDM sound that Tom loves, but still had its own sense of grandeur, or at least a more better harnessing of it.
Yeah.
I feel like, that would probably realistically be where their sound goes. But I would love to see that. That wouldn't be a bad idea either. Do you honestly, follow-up question to that, do you think Jay would ever do something as bold as 444 again in his career? Or do you think he'll kind of slowly, like he's already been doing? You think he will?
I think he will, because Jay is now in the situation he can do whatever he wants. And the album that I would love to hear Jay-Z make is a laid-back jazz rap album.
Yes.
Because, and here's the reason why. I think it would play to a lot of his older-fashioned sensibilities.
Yep.
He's always liked to draw comparisons to Sinatra and the greats of that specific Rat Pack golden age a little bit. I think that he could pull upon some of the best production in the industry to get a more opulent sound. He's already got a template of how to do it because jazz rap has been a thing throughout the 2010s.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd like to hear Jay-Z work with someone like Ninth Wonder or Fonte.
Yes.
Or a sound like that that's not quite Southern, but allows him to drill into his maturity.
I honestly think that would be the better type of follow-up to 444. I don't know if Jay... I mean, you're absolutely right, and he's in a place now where he can do whatever he wants. But I feel like one of the things that made that almost brought him to the place to make 444 was the fact that it was partially a follow-up of such a tumultuous time for him. So he channeled that in a way that made the music and with No ID's production tapped into a very, again, personal side. And I think that as Jay sort of seems to become more comfortable in life, the music will start to reflect that. I would love to see him do a jazz rap album, honestly. Like, mentioning that, yeah, that sounds way up my alley, especially since I think Jay, especially if he tries to tap into some of the more dynamic flows that he's capable of, he could make an incredible, like, diet bus driver in his own way, if he were to really expand his palette more. And I feel like he's capable of it for sure, but I don't know if he'll do it.
See, you want to know where I think that actually might indicate he's capable and interested in doing it? The fact he worked with Jay Electronica. The fact he put out that project this year, where Jay-Z is the only reason to listen to that album. I stand by that, especially with how bad the production is. But if he manages to tap into a lot of that side of things, but brings it just back to the human side, and works with a lot more of the producers and rappers who are a little older, with Jay-Z not having to chase anything, I think he's got the taste to do it, and I think he's got the maturity to make the better parts stick. Hell, he got Jay Electronica to somehow produce an album, like, and Jay sounded like he cared about that more than Jay Electronica did. So
that's true. Wow, thank you for bringing that up. I
now
think
set your hopes to be crushed.
yeah, thank you, Mo. But thank you for steering, for bringing just that subject up. That was a nice. I appreciated that a lot. As far as, do you have any other following up remarks you want to make about the either subject that we've talked about, a follow up for them, or the subject that we started with?
I think I'm otherwise all right. I think I got through everything I'd like to say. The one thing I do want to say, and this is just preemptive for for the potential Radiohead or Jay-Z fans who might take askance at some of the things I've brought up. Please listen to something beyond Radiohead and Jay-Z.
Yeah, as a diehard Radiohead fan, I will agree that some of y'all kind of got your head up your ass a little bit.
You're not as bad as Tool fans, but you're getting there.
Yeah, I would agree. Tom has made bad records, so have the rest of the guys. And trust me, on the daily, I break down Jay-Z fans pretty regularly because for a guy...
Jay-Z has multiple projects with R. Kelly.
Yeah, and for a guy with 14 records and only 4 of them being worth a damn, that's kind of sad.
I'd say more than 4, but that's me.
Well, which ones? Which ones would you say? Like worth a full damn.
Let me pull up the discography here. I want to make sure I'm getting anything. Because I can rattle this Jay-Z album's discography. Here we go. Reasonable Doubt.
Yeah.
Great project.
Absolutely.
In my lifetime, it hasn't aged well.
Yeah.
Volume 2, I think, is good.
Yeah, I think it's a solid record.
Volume 3, don't care. Dynasty is a coaster. Blueprint is good.
Yeah.
Blueprint 2, ugh.
Yeah.
Black Album is really good. Kingdom Come, I kind of think is forgettable. Kingdom Come's
for sure.
I like American Gangster a lot.
Really? Okay.
Yes.
I think it's fine.
That's one I defend pretty strongly. I think that in terms of the concept and Jay sounding like he cares a little more than he has to.
That's fair. That's really fair, honestly.
Blueprint 3 sucks. Magna Carta Holy Grail sucks. Watch the Throne is way more mediocre than everyone will argue it is.
Oh, for sure.
444 is excellent. Best of Both Worlds is trash. Unfinished Business is trash. Collision Course, it sounds like Jay was never in the studio with Linkin Park, and that's infuriating. And Everything Is Love is a concert album, is for the Beyonce's concert tour.
Yeah. See, so we kind of sit in a similar lane, because I like Reasonable Doubt. I like The Blueprint. I like Volume 2. I don't think Volume 2 as a record is on the same plane as like Reasonable Doubt, Blueprint, Black Album, or 444. But I think it's got decent enough cuts. But I think it's interesting. Maybe it's because I haven't spun American Gangster in a while. But it's one of those records I've never looked upon fondly, at least as fondly. I don't think it's terrible. I think it's better than Watch the Throne and Blueprint 3. But I'll have to give that a spin.
It's often ignored, and I get why. To me, I think it's a little less commercial. I don't think it really had the hits in the same way as some of Jay's other projects. I take it over friggin' Kingdom Come or The Dynasty.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, and that's the problem with Jay's discography. There's a lot of duds, but people seem to neglect those when discussing him as an artist, which is the problem with most stands.
That's the New York bias.
Yeah.
That's the New York bias. Now, granted, as much as I have bias for other certain things, I'm not going to claim that everything Snoop Dogg ever put out was great, or everything that Master P ever put out was, or everything like Ludacris or T.I. put out was great. It wasn't. But the thing is, you got to be able to look, not objectively, but be able to understand broader context of a discography in its whole.
Yeah. No, for sure.
I'm not going to say objectively because you can't evaluate art objectively. And there, I just tainted your entire comment section.
Thanks, Mark.
You're welcome. You got that engagement.
It's true. But I do want to pass a question off to the audience. If there were any talking points we may have missed, be sure to let us know. As was in the beginning, I try to address any pertinent ones or any ones that expanded upon it well in the following episodes. And I also do want to pass Mark's question off to you guys of what would you like to hear Radiohead or Jay-Z explore next sonically, because I think that's a really interesting, especially with it how it ties into the concept of the episode. What places would you like to see these two iconic artists within their scenes go? And once again, please broaden your horizons. Listen to more than just Jay-Z and Radiohead, because I guarantee you there's a lot more music out there that is worth as much of a damn.
And Jay-Z, if you happen to be listening, just find the time, give Kanye a hug.
Please.
Tell him that he's a good boy, and maybe maybe he'll step back from at least some of this foolishness.
Yes. Give him a call. Send him, I know it's times where we're supposed to be distant. Send him something meaningful. And just let him know you're there. Just let him know.
Yeah. You're kind of right. Don't give him a hug. He was just in a rally in South Carolina, and I guarantee people were not testing there in the same degree as they should be.
Yeah.
But send him a good emoji.
Yeah.
Like send him a TikTok.
Send him.
You want to, because Kanye probably has a TikTok that we don't know about. And isn't that friggin' terrifying?
He's using it as a springboard for ideas. That's all. He's using it the same way Drake does. But
Drake uses TikTok better than the person who uses TikTok best right now is Jason Derulo. So
true, very true. Which is not entirely. I mean, it's a little shocking, honestly. But
I'm actually kind of happy. I've been watching him from a distance because I refuse to install TikTok and have that on my phone.
Same.
But I watch him from a distance and how he built a following there, and I'm like, okay, I see what you're doing to regain your audience, and you're doing it way better than I expected you would.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, Mark, I really thank you, man. I appreciate you for coming on the show. You've been a hell of a guest.
No problem. It was fun.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Do you have any pertinent projects or anything you do want to put out there for the people?
Sure. If you guys want to be able to find me, I'm at Spectrum Pulse on YouTube. I also have Patreon. Look up Spectrum Pulse there. I also run a side series on a separate channel called Billboard Breakdown, where on a weekly basis I go through the inanities and the insanities, the Hot 100. My regular weekly series on my main channel is called On the Pulse, where I'll typically tackle about 6 to 8 albums. My big project right now is going through the best albums of the 2010s. It's a project I've been working on for, I want to say, the past 6 months. It's going to be a top 100 list.
Nice.
So it's meaty, but it's also the sort of project I'm planning on. I don't think it's going to be done this month, but hopefully by the end of the summer. I'd really like to be done by the end of the summer.
I'm personally very, very excited to see what you put on that list. Again, go follow Mark. Seriously, he's been at it for a hell of a time. He's
7 years.
Yeah, he's a really great critic, and I think that if you somehow are watching me and not watching Mark, you need to be watching both of us. And if you are listening to this, of course, man. If you are listening to this on YouTube and you like the show, be sure to give this a like. If you want to see more of my music, gaming, and genre nerdery content, be sure to subscribe. Special thanks to my patrons as well. If you would like to join their ranks, linked in the description is my Patreon. Get early access to content, exclusive content, and you help drive the community. I think we are going to wrap up this show. If you're listening to this elsewhere and you want to contribute as well, follow the socials. I'm Viral Rack everywhere. We're going to get out of here. I have been Johnny Viral Rack. He has been Mark from Spectrum Pulse. You guys have good days, lives, and situations, and I'll see you another day.